Good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Hartell, and I'm going to talk to you about digital comparative judgment. This session, you can also always post questions in the chat, and please share on Twitter. The hashtag is on your top right corner. I will provide an overview of comparative judgment, what it is, and how it can be applied. It has many ways in which it can be applied. So I work in Haninge municipality, where I work together with schools in different projects, primarily focused on STEM education, but also on formative assessment in general. I'm involved in a couple of research projects, but today I'm going to talk about a methodology called comparative judgment. But first, just to frame the whole session, are these two quotes, which I take a moment to read them for yourself. These two quotes are the quotes that I always carry with me, and during this presentation as well. And also, when I say formative assessment, this is what I mean. It's to use evidence about learning to adapt what happens in the classroom to better meet the learner's needs. And this is generic, but also very subject-specific. Comparative judgment has been applied in various settings and different subjects and different contexts. But my examples would primarily be from STEM education. But first, as a Swede, I have to talk about the weather. Today, here in Stockholm, where we are, it's sunshine and cold. It's about below 7 degrees. It's not the coldest I've ever experienced, but I can assure you it's colder outside than it's inside. When I compare the temperature in here, it's kind of warm. It's not the warmest I've ever experienced, but it's warmer than outside. And I think we can agree upon all that it is warmer in here than outside when we compare. We could use a thermometer to measure these differences, but then we need to know which scale we want to use. Is it Fahrenheit, Celsius, or something else? But in overall, we can make the judgment that it is warmer in here than outside. Here are some pictures of pumpkins. And why on earth am I showing pumpkins? It's nearly Christmas, and pumpkin is not the vegetable that we use for Christmas, but at least here we don't. But if we look at these pumpkins, you can see that the one on the top, to your top right corner, is larger. We can assume that that one is heavier than the small one in the middle, the bottom, in the middle. Perhaps one of the white colored pumpkins are heavier than the one in the middle, but perhaps it's less heavy than the larger one on top, in the top right corner. I think we can agree upon that from our experience. And if we ever experience the pumpkin, we can agree upon that. We could also we could weigh them to have an absolute measure, but perhaps we don't need that at the moment if we just want to agree which one is heavier. Why am I talking about the weather? Well, that could have obvious reason because I'm a Swede. We always talk about the weather, and pumpkins and heavy or heavier. This comes back to comparative judgment. This guy on the picture, his name is Louis Leon Thurston. He was a psychiatrist. He tried to treat his patients. He was into psychometrics, so he liked to measure things on absolute scales. But he soon realized when he was treating his patients who was traumatized, it was difficult to treat them and see if they made progress, if they felt better when he was using an absolute scale. So he tried to find other ways. And then he reflected upon it for a while and tried different methods. And he ended up with the law of comparative judgment, which at a glance, you could say, it's that you compare. For instance, if he would ask his patients, so how do you feel better now? That's perhaps difficult to say, but if you say, do you feel better today than you did yesterday or the day before? That is easier to say than, and also much easier to say than if you just say, how well do you feel now on a scale from 1 to 10? He was treating patients who were traumatized from an experience from crime. And a severe crime, how do you measure a severe crime? Well, there are laws for that, of course, but you could also, that's the experience that the one who has been experienced that assault. Never mind. I won't go into details now. I could talk about this forever. But in education, we do comparative judgment. We do this intuitively in our practice as teachers. We do this as intuitively as human beings. We compare all the time. Compare the weather. It's warmer in here than outside. It's cold outside, but it's much colder somewhere else, perhaps. And also from our own experience. We bring our own experience into our education, our teaching and learning activities. This is a picture from Japan where the Japanese teacher, the welding teacher, shows his students a melt. And he compared two melts. And from his experience and his knowledge, he pinpoint and contrast what he says as a good melt compared to less good welt. Instead of saying this is 95% better than this one, he can instead say this one is better, and then he explain why it is better. And the students can compare these two and see the difference. He invites his students to his experience, his expertise. Also, in terms of artwork, for instance, these are two pictures from a school in Haninge, actually, and you can compare them. Which one is better? Perhaps you like the one to your left, perhaps, or you like the one to the right. Well, it depends what you're looking for. If the students are practicing how to do modern art, naivistic art, then the one to the right perhaps is most accurate at this moment. But if you are more into romantic art, then perhaps the one to the left, which is why I have a picture of Winnie the Pooh here. It's very important in assessment that you know what to look for before you start looking for it. You can't cover all the things that can happen, but it's a good idea. It's good to have an idea of what is about to happen. And it's very good and it's prosperous for your students to know what you want them to learn. So, and Winnie the Pooh says it's better to know what to look for before you start looking for it. Comparative judgment could be a tool to unpack what teachers emphasize as criteria for success, what they emphasize as good quality work. And I will give you some examples on how to do that. Digital tools. A comparative judgment can be made, well, without any digital tools at all. But digital tools can facilitate the process of comparative judgment. You can be multiple judges. You can also have different kinds of evidence of learning. Here's an example of a portfolio with text and pictures, but you could also have portfolios of film, or student can make a presentation, or you can, well, all kinds of digital evidence you can have here. And you do pairwise comparisons. You show this, and you watch these two pairs, and then you have in an iterative process another pair, and another pair is presented to you while you do this. It's kind of hard to explain this in words. It's much easier if you have a go and have a trial. And there are multiple different kind of tools. Well, not multiple. There are a couple of tools available for digital comparative judgment. And I suggest that you explore. So when you do comparative judgment and you have these pairwise comparisons, you choose one as better. I can go back, but one as better. And then you can, and then one, and then two, and two. There are pairwise comparisons in this iterative process. It's almost like a Swiss tournament. And you end up with a rank order. And rank order is about, people get a bit they think it's kind of problematic with rank orders. It can be, if it depends on what you use them for. The rank order provided here it doesn't correspond to any grades or anything. It's just a professional consensus from the group of judges. Better and also very good. It's not better or worse, it's better. So all of these, for instance, could be performing really well, but this is the rank order that produced by the group of judges. And when you press these, this is also a practical thing with digital tools. You have this rank order, and then you press, and you can see the student work. Say we press number 15, for instance, and then you see the student work, and then you can press again and again, and you can see, and we can see this. And those of you who are into technical drawings, you have, I guess, something to say about how these students have performed their technical drawings. There are some standards that are not achieved here. So perhaps we need to teach them more. We can have this as a basis for group discussion. So there are lots of things you can do. This was just a brief overview of comparative judgment, and you can use it for many different things, both summative and formative purposes. You can also track progress and feedback. And peer feedback, I will give you an example of that. I think you can use it as teacher training, have a trial on different quality work, moderation. And I think ICT here is a servant instead of a driver. We should be careful when we choose to embed digital tools in our education and our teaching and learning activities, but when it is a servant instead of the driver. And my primarily emphasis on comparative judgment is that it's a catalyst for discussion, and I use it as a research method. Before you get overwhelmed of if you want to have a trial and try different digital tools, I think you should really choose very carefully, and especially make sure that the software provider follows GDPR and also provides support. And also in terms of ethics. There are large-scale trials of comparative judgment, and I think you must be very careful when you handle student data and also the student work. Who owns the student work? Who owns the essay or the portfolio that the student have produced? Is it you or is it the student? Check your legal requirements, and also in terms of ethics. It's one of the benefits of embedding research in school development programs is that we have as a ground rule to always, for instance, seek informed consent. Now I will give you some examples. The first one will be on teachers' assessment practices. Here we had an experiment. We did an intervention with a primary school. Kids were 11 or 12 years old, and they designed a robot, a model, and also a portfolio. And it was a multimodal portfolio, and they gathered the evidence of learning by themselves. So there were lots of data. And then the teachers, there were 5 teachers, and here is one of the teachers. She is conducting comparative judgment on the student portfolio. So she was presented with a pair of two portfolios at a time, and then she chose one portfolio as better. And then she also provided a comment why she was choosing this one as better. And we use this for research to find out what do teachers emphasize as criteria for success in technology education. It turned out that they emphasized to see the narrative of the portfolio. It wasn't that surprising because it was a design task, but on the other hand, we did not know that before, which is why we investigated it. And we also interviewed the teachers what they thought about doing this comparative judgment, the 5 of them. And they said it was a nice experience to experience other than their own student work. It's not that often you as a teacher have the privilege to see other students' work than your own. It took them about an hour to conduct these pairwise comparisons through comparative judgment. And it was 25 portfolios. It took them 1 hour. And we had a reliability of 98.3, which is high. We then another study which I conducted with Scott, Emily, and Greg at Purdue University. It was sort of a follow-up on this criteria for success. We had 700 plus, more than 700 student work, and we did a comparative judgment in an international perspective. What does different context, where we had judges from Sweden, America, and the UK/Ireland, and they in 3 groups they did comparative judgment and found that on the same student work, and we found some interesting differences which we tried to explain in the article mentioned below. We could see different kinds of what they emphasize. Swedes, for instance, emphasize less is more and functionality, which is that surprising, perhaps. Who knows? But it's very interesting. And this study also generated a discussion within the research community. And also, we talk about technology education. What do we mean by technology education? This was just a short summary. You can read the paper if you like. So to stimulate dialogue, we do this, we compare and we talk about this, and we end up with the result, but then we start to analyze the data out of this. And no software is needed, like this welding example, but it's easier if you have, it's easier to collaborate across nations if you have a digital tool. And I think it may have the potential to increase affordances for teachers' assessment practices, which is something that I are very intrigued about, to emphasize the environment which teachers are situated in. And the teacher said this was anonymously reported that they enjoyed the overall experience. So it's nice when teachers enjoy what you do, but more importantly, it's more important that the students learn. So what can they benefit from comparative judgment? Well, for instance, if teachers may embed peer feedback in the learning activities, that's one thing to do. And you can do that in a traditional way, and always when in terms of feedback is always important. The only thing that matters, actually, as William says, is what the students make out of it. Do they use it, and how they react upon it? So feedback in theory can be very good, but also the only thing that matters is how the recipient react upon it. And this is an ongoing study, and this is so exciting. It's a European project. We are 13 partners from 8 different European countries. We try to design an experiment and trial learning activities in the STEM subjects, all emphasizing sustainable development and targeting the Agenda 2030 goals. And here there are some students, and this is also we have 2 master students, Ida and Camilla, who are doing their master's thesis within this project, and they have done an amazing job. It's not published yet, but it will be soon. And the students have chosen an area in the vicinity of their school which isn't used much, and so they were asked to redesign this area. What do they want to use this area for, and how can we make it better? And also with a twist of Agenda 2030, so transportation and what kinds of choose different kinds of material from a sustainable development perspective. They also learned lots about mathematics, and chemistry and technology, of course. And they produced digital portfolios, and then they did peer assessment. So this is the overview, the research design overview. So the arrow describes the process of where the students were working. They were working in groups, and we conducted online observations. I did that with some colleagues from KTH. And then the students made peer feedback, and they continued to the feedback comments were fed back and used, and then they finalized the project. We also made interviews with teachers and the students. And here we do these online observations. Just wanted to show you because it's such a nice. During this pandemic, we're not allowed to visit the schools, so we did online observations instead. And the benefits of the digital tools, like comparative judgment, which is shown here, is that regardless of where you are, you can access this. So for an online education, or it's really easy accessible if you choose a good tool, that is. Here is the judge's view, the students in this experiment, where they do comparative judgment, and they did peer feedback. So this was a double dual peer feedback, you could say, because each student were sat in front of the computer and peer assessed their peers' work. And they provided comments. They chose one as better, and we had a long, thorough discussion on this with the students beforehand. The teacher did that, so just to make sure that everyone knew what they were going to do. And then they were presented with these two portfolios, and they chose one as better, but they also provided feedback to their peers. So why is this better? Or have you forgotten to fill that out? Or you have not done that, or you have done that really well as well. And by being exposed to this, their peers' portfolios, they also provide feedback on their own. So the judges in this, here it was the students, they also get feedback from their peers by looking at these their peers' work. This study is influenced by a study conducted at Purdue University, directed by Dr. Scott Bartholomew, where he did. They set up an experiment where students did a design task, and then they did peer feedback. That's a traditional way, face-to-face, and half of the group did peer feedback through ACJ, Adaptive Comparative Judgment. And they found that the students who experienced the peer feedback through ACJ, they achieved better in the end. And they cannot explain exactly why this happened, but they suggest that it is a worked example effect, because they get the flavor, a scent of their friends' work, which is why it's so interesting to find out more. So can it benefit the student learning? Well, who knows? Not by default, it cannot, but it depends on what you do with it. So this is just an illustration of how these feedback comments are fed back within the process. So it's always important when you work with feedback that the feedback is fed back in the process, and that the recipient can actually have the opportunity to act upon it. And I'll go back. We also have the student work here, so we could see before in the research design, we could see how the student work looked before they received the feedback comments, and then we could also see what they did with the feedback, and we also have the feedback comments, and we are currently analyzing that data right now, and it's super exciting. And perhaps I can talk about this in the research at Haninge 2022. Who knows? To be continued. But I think, I don't think, this is the conclusion for CJ, comparative judgment. It has a potential to facilitate peer feedback. It's very powerful as a catalyst for discussion. There are other studies, for instance, Canty and Siri et al., who have shown that students, they saw very positive in making this pairwise comparison, and that they learned more by critically examining their mistakes, and also to reflect upon their own mistakes, or not just mistakes in a positive way. And also these pairwise comparisons, they provide support for learners to more critically examine how they can do even better. But there are, of course, ethical considerations here that you should always be very careful about. So think ahead what you want to do. Oh, here comes, sorry, here is this, the example of what the student work. I must have mismatched the order of this. Here you can see one of the things that the students at the open spaces wanted to do. They wanted to create a jump yard at the backyard of their school. And at first they had not filled out the subtask to motivate why they chose a certain material, etc. And also you can see that the sketches they have done is they can improve as well. And the comments there, they're in Swedish now, but you can see that they have they get comments like, you haven't filled out all your subtasks. And then when we look back in, and when we analyze the portfolios after the feedback, we could see that they have filled out all the subtasks. But also we can see also that it is very difficult to analyze just the feedback comments. You should always have, it's much easier, or perhaps it's even more difficult when you have the authentic student work and the comments prior and after the feedback review. So this is a way to invite your students. Well, actually, this is a shout out. Invite students to your own areas of expertise. You can do this in different ways. This is an example from a school that in Haninge, where they have, in a very nice way, they have produced different exemplars, and also they have posted the requirements, the knowledge requirements, the criteria for each grade. But it also depends on what kind of artwork are you practicing. What are your students learning at the moment? Is it modern art, or is it classic art? Remember Winnie the Pooh. And try to communicate this. And by communicating through examples, that has been proven to be a good way forward. And perhaps, it's not proven yet, but it has potential. Comparative judgment could have the potential to at least get a flavor and invite students to what does success look like. Like this. This is a description of something. Compare this to criteria in the Swedish national syllabus. It doesn't say much, but maybe some of you can guess what this is about. Is it a cake, perhaps? Or is it a new flavor of chocolate? Or is it perhaps, since it is Saturday, could it be a wine? Could be. Wine. Yes, Thomas. It's wine. And I'm not a wine connoisseur, and I can gladly admit that I don't know if this is a good description of a wine, but this is from the Systembolaget, a description of a wine. I'm not sure if it fits to my dinner tonight, or what kind of wine it is. But if I knew at least what bottle, and also if I got the experience of trying different wines, especially if I can do that within a community of practice, like connoisseurship. You can be a wine connoisseur, but can you be also a STEM connoisseur, perhaps? Can we talk about this? We, as a professional group of teachers, we need to talk about and try to put words on our expertise. We know a lot of things. We could easily, kind of easily, at least say this is a good piece of work, but it's much more difficult to express that in words. But if you have examples, and what if we could have like a wine tasting, a STEM tasting, we could have a trial on student work and talk about this. We could, through digital tools, we can do this easily from different parts of the world. We can unite and have a cohort of student work, and then we can do comparative judgment, and then we can talk about this. As long as we follow the ethical guidelines, of course. This is the same. this is what the teacher did, and the Japanese metalwork teacher did when he was inviting his students to his area of expertise. He contrasted two pieces of work, and he pinpointed and he told the students, so this is a good melt or this is a good melt. Maybe, I'm not sure, maybe you can fill in a rubric, or you could put an absolute value of, say, 20 points, or is it 30 points of, and how many is top, or 67%. But what does it mean? It's much better if you have an example. And I see great potential of using comparative judgment, for instance, in teacher education, at professional development, but also during their teaching training at the university, to get a flavor of what quality work look like. So, digital comparative judgment could be a facilitator to improve teachers' assessment practices. I've just given you a very, very brief overview. I am aware of that, but I think it has great potential, and it's not just me who thinks so. Dr. Buckley and I have written an overview of comparative judgment where we go through different. We haven't covered all the papers, but quite a lot, and this is what we see. We see great potential in this, and the Royal Society also emphasize comparative judgment as a way forward in the future of assessment of practical STEM education. So there is potential here, because you can facilitate the assessment, I think primarily for the formative purposes, in unpacking teachers' assessment practices, on competences and broader, not just the correct answer or not. Here are ingredients, like the wine connoisseur, for instance. And I also think, because you do this collaboratively and you get very high reliability, you get 90% and above, which is very, very high. And I think that's a power of the collective, because you do this together, and together we can do this, and we also have very high reliability as a result. But it's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It's an area, it's a catalyst for discussion. And it seems that it has potential to support learning, and we need to dig deeper into that, I think. So, to be continued. This was just a very fast run through some of the things, the potential for comparative judgment. It's much easier if you have a go. It's really simple. And I know teachers, especially I know a technology teacher who does this by hand with his students, where he have like free example of student work, and they have this in front of them, and they move them around, and they talk about, so this is, why is this good from this particular perspective and such. So, and this presentation would not have been possible without the support of the pupils in the schools and the teachers in the schools, and also to my lovely colleagues at Haninge and KTH and elsewhere, because we have an international research community. So thank you, and good luck.